Howdy, she's back, she being me, and today I wanted to talk about the difference between bipolar 1 disorder and bipolar 2 disorder. So to start off with the similarities, they both involve shifts in your mood, your activity levels, your energy levels, and your concentration. So that is how they are similar. But the two biggest differences are the intensity of manic episodes. So for bipolar 1, you would experience a manic episode, whereas with a bipolar 2 diagnosis, you would experience a hypomanic episode, which is, for all intents and purposes, a less severe version of a manic episode, hence hypomanic. Okay, and the second difference is the prevalence of major depressive episodes. Technically, a bipolar 2 diagnosis requires you to experience a major depressive episode, whereas a bipolar 1 diagnosis does not require that. If you have it, you can still be diagnosed with bipolar 1, but it doesn't require having a major depressive episode. Okay, so as for the diagnostic criteria, for bipolar 1, you have to experience at least one manic episode, and this cannot be due to medication, substances, or a medical illness. It just has to, in a sense, come from a vacuum. Whereas with bipolar 2, the diagnostic criteria is at least one hypomanic episode, also not caused by medication, substances, or medical illness, and also at least one major depressive episode. So now I think this begs a larger question of what is the difference between mania and hypomania, and I am going to read an excerpt. So mania and hypomania are both marked by persisting, elevated, expansive, or irritable mood that is uncharacteristic of the person at baseline. This is extremely important to understand because when you hear someone describe, let's say, a hypomanic episode, because those tend to be less severe, when you hear someone describe it, you may have the knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, but like, I exhibit that behavior, or I do that, and, I don't feel as though I have a mental illness. The key part is that is uncharacteristic of the person at baseline. So for them, it's uncharacteristic. Maybe for you, whatever actions they're telling you about, are just part of your day-to-day, but they don't affect you in a negative way, right? So that's a really, really important distinction. So hypomania and mania, they both share these common symptoms. So we have abnormally elevated self-esteem. Then there is the decreased need for sleep, increased talkativeness, flight of ideas or racing thoughts, abnormal distractibility, increased energy or goal-oriented activity, abnormally risky behaviors. So for hypomania, the episode has to last for at least 4 consecutive days, whereas with mania, we're treading into like a week territory. With hypomania, it's not severe enough to affect like school or your social life, and the need for hospitalization, there is none with hypomania. With mania, possibly, not always, but possibly. And also important to know, as I mentioned before, that if you have bipolar 2 disorder, but your hypomania goes into the territory of mania, your diagnosis will be changed to bipolar 1 disorder. So it's kind of how that works, and may seem a little confusing to people who don't quite understand bipolar disorder as a whole, but it really is, like I said in my last video, like a speedometer. So you can be at 50 miles per hour, which, let's say that's a little bit fast. I don't know, that could be hypomania, and then you can just go into 140 one day, and that would give you, I was going to say award, that would give you bipolar 1 diagnosis. It's also important to note that hypomania, and at least hypomania that I know of, I'm not quite sure about mania, but it can be attached to something other than a bipolar 2 diagnosis. And so people aren't necessarily speaking out of term if they say they experience hypomania, but they're not bipolar 2. So that can sound a little strange, but I mean, some of the things that I read, so seasonal affective disorder, you can experience hypomania, postpartum psychosis, schizoaffective disorder, stroke, dementia, lupus. There's a lot of different medical problems out there where you could experience something similar to hypomania, but in the context of bipolar disorder, it looks different only because hypomania is always followed by a major depressive disorder or episode. Okay, so since I just kind of broke down mania and hypomania, I figured it would make a lot of sense to talk about hypomania since I've experienced it. I am diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, or I was diagnosed with it almost 6 years ago. And so I also wanted to give you guys, I guess, a less romanticized idea of what an episode can look like. I think oftentimes we feel like we have to associate mental illness with the most extreme and intense, episodes, but oftentimes it can be a little bit boring and people don't really want to hear about that. But I think it's important to show potentially a different side. So, I kind of wanted to just get into a less intense account of one of my episodes of hypomania. And I do have more intense accounts, but I'm not necessarily comfortable talking about that. So I'll talk about my hypomania. So the most recent episode, I think, was about a month ago, a little bit more over a month ago. It's when I was first announcing starting my YouTube channel. And I have done this a few times, so I don't think it seemed uncharacteristic of me. What was uncharacteristic and what people didn't see behind the scenes was my decreased need for sleep. If you know anything about me, I need a lot of sleep. So me waking up early, when my boyfriend's going to work is super abnormal, not like me at all. And I didn't feel like I needed sleep at all. I had a lot of energy. And I also was really, really, really focused on making my videos, but to the point where it was an obsession and I was spending all day and I had racing thoughts and really high energy and essentially the whole list that you see with hypomania, what's regarding it, I was experiencing. However, at the time I didn't know I was experiencing it, which is one of the kind of unfortunate things, is that it's really hard to know when you're in an episode. And you also don't really want to be told you are, because at the time it's a lot of fun. So like I said, it has to be at least 4 days, but it can be longer. And I think I realized once I was no longer once I was no longer in the episode, I went on to Instagram Live, which I do not do that. And I was laughing hysterically. I'm pretty sure I still have the footage. I'm not sure if I want to show it, but I was laughing hysterically. I felt like I had the energy of like 1,000 school children. I was just feeling pure ecstasy. I was very talkative. It's not unlike me to be talkative necessarily, but the amount of energy and the amount of the intensity of it, like looking back at the video, I'm like, it's not me day to day. That's not who I am. It's part of me, of course, but it's not what you would see typically of me just like day to day. So looking back on it, it's always odd for me. It's always really strange, and it's always a little bit unsettling. Like, once again, to the outside world, I think people see it and they go, like, what's the big deal, Cheyenne? Like, you went on Instagram Live and you laughed a bunch. And it's like, no, that's not the big deal. The big deal is that I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't taking care of myself. I was really fixated on something. I was a little bit, I don't want to say delusional, but I definitely was overconfident in my abilities at doing something I had never really done, which is not necessarily a great thing. And the worst part, which I always try to make people understand, is that after the episode is over, I always have a depressive episode. And so the next morning I woke up after that Instagram Live and I felt ashamed, I felt embarrassed, I felt horrible about myself, I didn't like myself, I didn't like everybody, just like in a very general way, not like specifically I'm just writing vendettas against people, but I just didn't. I was very, very dissatisfied with everything, and it's so intense. And I also have a problem with black and white thinking, so I know that's like maybe a comorbidity, but it's part of how I can be. And particularly if I'm spiraling, you know, in a depressive episode. And it was really bad, and I felt awful. And so that's why I try to explain to people, like, yeah, hunky-dory, like, yeah, everything seems great, like, I'm having a good time, but little do you know, I'll wake up someday, usually, you know, about a week later, and I'll feel absolutely dreadful, and I'll just be experiencing just very bleak depression. Not saying there's bright depression. I don't know why I said that, but so just a recap, I guess, with that hypomanic episode, once again, it wasn't, you know, life-threatening. It didn't affect me on all these crazy levels, but it did affect my mental state, which is the most important thing when we talk about mental illness in terms of, like, your self-care and how you're doing mentally. And I wasn't doing mentally well at all. And, you know, I didn't delete, but I privated all my YouTube videos. I, like, deactivated my Instagram, and I took everything off my phone, and I just was, like, completely mortified. And once again, everyone, you know, I had a lot of people like, hey, like, keep going, like, you know, I hope you don't feel that way about yourself. And I really, really appreciated the support, and it meant a lot. But right now it's just me saying that, you know, although the support meant a lot, it didn't matter to me at the time, because I was so, you know, I was in the thick of the depression, right? Like, I was just in that fog, and there's nothing you could do necessarily to get me out of it. So I do appreciate the support, but maybe this is more of a glimpse for friends, family, I don't know, people who know me. That's kind of typical, you know, you have your hypomania. Oh, she's so funny, she's laughing a lot, she's having a great time, she's got a bunch of energy, she's Cheyenne. And yeah, I mean, it's not great. It's not great. The aftermath is never great. So I think I will make an episode. Oh my god. I'm going to make a hypomanic episode. No, I would like to make a video about, like, trying to spot triggers, or trying to figure out what your triggers are for either hypomania or mania, and how to do your best to stop them from happening. So I will make a video about that, and I just appreciate you guys watching. And yeah, so cool. There you go. There you go. There you go. Now you know. Thanks.